Hello, everyone. My name is John Oliver. I am the city councilor from Ward 1. I am chair of the Rules Subcommittee. Uh, we are being audio and video recorded. I think it's fair to say that this is indeed a regularly scheduled meeting, as regularly scheduled as they can be, anyhow. I am joined tonight via Zoom. There are three members of the Rules Subcommittee. Myself, John Oliver, we have Josh Krinsman and Bill Humphrey, counselors from Ward 4 and 5 respectively. We're also being joined by Counselor Pam Wright this evening, and now Counselor Maliki, both from Ward 3, not members of the subcommittee, but as always, welcome. We're also joined by two members of the clerk's office. We have Carol, who's looking dashing with her hair pulled back this evening. Took me a minute to recognize you, believe it or not. That was enough of a disguise, as well as our clerk for the committee, Ms. Jacqueline Norton. And tonight we have three items kind of that are at least planned for us to get through. I am hoping we do arrive at consensus on all three items. Only one of which I believe is new to the conversation, but I think it's fairly straightforward. Without further ado, I want to jump into those because, like I mentioned, I do hope we can arrive at decisions on all three of these because there's still quite a few open items in front of the subcommittee to deal with this term. But the first item, and Councillor Krinsman, if you want to kind of perhaps jump in, I think you had kind of brought this idea to the forefront. But and actually, I'm not even going to try. I'm just going to turn it over to you if you don't mind, and just kind of step us through some of your thoughts here.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate that. I am known as an ideas man, so yes, I had brought this idea to the forefront.
If you say so, that's fine.
And if I may be so bold, let me just acknowledge that Councillor Baker has joined us.
Well, thanks to the intervention of the chair.
Thank you for that.
And good, because Councillor Baker, you're joining right as we begin the first item. You haven't really missed anything yet except introductions. And the first item is my proposed wording change to the rules procedure in terms of the sort of pre-session caucus at which the councilors elect traditionally elect the new council president. And the proposed amendment is that, for those, I think we all know at this point, but what usually happens is that there is a vote for president. If no one is elected, there is immediately another vote for president. And if no one is elected, there is immediately a third vote for president. And it seems a little foolish because what happens often is that nothing changes from one vote to the next. We go through three votes, and then those people aren't allowed to run again until the procedures have moved forward. So my proposed amendment would explicitly state that nothing prohibits a recess from being taken. I think the draft says up to a 10-minute recess, which is fine. If folks want to talk about the length of it, that's fine. If folks don't want to mention a duration, that's fine. But I just think we ought to at least allow for the possibility that the session could recess so that discussion could be had, negotiations could happen, people could talk about what they're doing, why they're voting one way or the other, and maybe we could sort of break the tie before proceeding to a second and or third vote. That's basically the pitch in a nutshell, but love to hear how others think.
Speaking of which, we have a hand. Councillor Humphrey.
Thank you. I guess, yeah, I mean, narrowly, this seems like a good solution. I think my big question, certainly after last year, or I guess now over a year ago, was does this go far enough? Like, are we, because this is essentially what's proposed here is a very minor tweak to what we already have. And the question that came to my mind is, do we actually like that system as a way of picking the council president? I mean, the caucus as a overall thing, I think, yeah, that's a good idea. But, you know, there are potentially other ways you could that you could do the voting or something like that, or some systems.
You think of ranked choice voting?
Well, I had thought about that. That has its advantages and disadvantages. You could even, it crossed my mind earlier to suggest you could even say that anybody, unless they take themselves out of consideration for personal reasons because they aren't able to do the job, that they are automatically on the ballot as like a person that can be ranked. And, you could end up with somebody that really wasn't expected to be council president. And that's not necessarily the worst idea in the world.
We could conscript someone into the job?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think one thing that is used in some systems, I think, is to have some sort of a nomination threshold, right? Because part of the issue is that the rules here are assuming a scenario where there's a third place candidate or potentially two second place tied candidates, right? And like you have to eliminate the bottom candidate, right? And that is part of why the structure is the way that it is. But you could have a system where you have to get a certain number of nominations in advance, like, to be able to even run. You could potentially have it be very restrictive that anyone can only sign one nomination. You could have it where they could sign, two or unlimited nominations. You can toggle with the threshold on what you want for that. Like, do you have to get, say, at least 10 nominations, right? Or even 12 nominations or something like that to ensure that it's, going to get you to, a credible candidacy. Is that unfair in some way because maybe somebody, isn't going to get through on the first round, but they would be a consensus choice candidate? That's actually a problem with the rules as they exist right now, is that someone gets eliminated because they're the lowest candidate on the first ballot, but actually maybe they were the consensus pick. So I think I'm sure Councilor Baker is going to walk us through, the rationale for how we arrived at this particular system. And I get every component of it, but I think it is worth examining at this point, with the passage of time and some other scenarios that have transpired. Is this actually how we want to be doing it? And so, if we are going to stick with that, then I think this amendment makes a lot of sense as a quick fix. But I had definitely been wondering if we want to, rejigger it for the next one.
More significantly, right.
Right.
Councilor Baker?
No, thank you, and I apologies again for arriving late. But I support the amendment. I would not go to the next stage of altering the process very much. Again, this arose out of, and I lived through this personally, the deadlock where we went something like 80 days at 12 to 12 with no mechanism for breaking the deadlock. And so I think that the process has served us reasonably well, and I grant you there's an advantage for a pause, and then I'll support that. But I'm not prepared yet to go further, as Councilor Humphrey has indicated, because there are some scenarios I really would want to think through before I would do anything further. I think this has actually worked reasonably well over the last few times that I've experienced it. Certainly better than 85 days of deadlock. So,
And just if I may, I am curious. I've only been through this process twice. One of which was, as I think Councilor Humphrey, stated, it was deadlocked for the first three, and it does seem rather like, okay, yeah, hands up, hands down. Okay, we're gonna try that again. Hands up, hands down. So I get the challenge there when there's a deadlock, right? And then the follow-on challenges, for two additional candidates to kind of come into the on stage, so to speak. But I'm curious to know, what are some of the, what has happened in the past that would warrant a significant, change from the process we have today? I'm just curious.
I can't tell you what has happened that would warrant a change because I haven't seen the need, but I will tell you that what is the advantage of having the three ballots is that it gives people a chance to see where everyone else is. and sort of sort that out. And some people will say, I will support you on the first ballot and then wait and see, and I mean, the commitments vary as times from time to time in this process. So I do think the advantage of having multiple ballots with the same candidates before they're forced to withdraw gives everybody a chance to assess it. So, but we can always make a shift. But for the moment, I would support this change and just reserve judgment about another change if somebody has one later.
All right.
Yeah, I
Go
was
ahead, Jeff.
concerned definitely. I mean, I wasn't around for the 2017 one. I seem to recall hearing there was some drama there. But yeah, the one last year, I mean, that honestly, that got a bit silly, right? And not just because of the like no recess, but the amount of behind the scenes machinations that were happening to try to deliberately deadlock it for 3 ballots, then deliberately deadlock it again for 3 more ballots with different candidates, and then see if someone would flip on like the 7th ballot or 8th ballot, right?
Yeah,
That
something like that. Yeah.
that seemed very just kind of goofy. Um, and there was a lot of like game theory stuff happening of like, oh, well, what if a different person runs than we expected on the first one, and then but they're not trying to win, they're just trying to get it to be deadlocked so that they can win it in the next set of 3. Like that to me feels like there's a problem in the setup. And again, I think most of the format was actually not intended for a 12 to 12 situation, despite the caucus being set up to prevent a 12 to 12 situation. I think mostly it was a lot of it's written so that you can deal with a lower placed candidate getting eliminated or something like that. And I do understand the rationale for having at least, more than one vote between 2 candidates, because maybe someone, was doing a courtesy vote on one ballot and not realizing it was going to deadlock. And then the next time they're going to vote for, the real pick or whatever, in which case, yeah, having a recess is a good opportunity. But I don't know. It felt very gamey last year. And I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility for future ones as well. And it just seems like now might be the time to make some additional adjustments to fix that potentially. Um, but I'm not sure if I have them tonight.
Well,
Fair enough.
I would move ahead on what we've got and reserve judgment if we can.
Yeah, I'm
Josh?
sorry. Yeah, Matt. I'm with you, Councilor Humphrey. Like maybe there's a better way to do it. I hadn't thought about it beforehand, but honestly, if we want to look at ranked choice voting or something that, you can just take your vote and move on, especially now where we are in a presumptive state where we don't know who the next council president is going to be. We're probably not going to have our incumbent city council president there. It might be an opportune time to do that. I am
Right.
open to more changes. I mean, I guess I'd like for us to do this now, so we at least have the recess in place.
Makes sense.
But I'm very much open to, are there other things we should be looking at? And, if you and I want to work together, or someone else or other people have ideas about putting forward an actual proposal just to see if it has support, happy to do that.
All right. And I'm just curious, would we put a cap on the ranked choice voting? Like 3 candidates?
I wouldn't go there yet. Let him think about that later. Let's
Yeah.
get this done and move on if we can.
Fair enough.
But
Sorry,
I
I'm in the
think it's
embarrassing
yeah.
position of having forgotten about the meeting, and I have a wife who's downstairs making supper, and I would like to preserve my opportunity to
Hey,
return.
good a reason as any. I'm all in.
Well,
Fair enough.
I'll say, Counselor Oliver, that is the type of question that I had been thinking about earlier in the day. And like, if you want to, email us and say, make sure you think about X, Y, and Z, I'm happy to work with Counselor Krinsman and say, here are some potential ideas.
What about?
obviously, yeah, I've been thinking about like voting system stuff since probably like freshman year of high school.
Right.
And, I always say the thing about these is there's something that's like your best practice, ideal, whatever. And then there's what is the thing that is nearest to what you already have and can realistically implement. And I think those are not always the same thing. And I tend to
Yeah.
favor going for something that is relatively close to what you already have, rather than going for some sort of abstract ideal. But I think there are some potential changes that could be made that would make it more straightforward and less gamed out, I guess. And
Fair enough.
also, I mean, last year was kind of unusual in that the recount also sort of pushed the timing so that it just dragged out the entire process. But like, I don't know that everyone needed to be having like 50 phone calls for a month to figure out where they were for something that was sort of ultimately kind of ended how I figured it was going to end. Like, and that there was, ballot after ballot after ballot, and it was just the same exact 12 and 12. There wasn't even any different configuration of 12. Like, yeah, so I think there's something to be considered there, but I'm all for, let's move ahead with this specific thing tonight so that we have
All
that
right.
locked in just in case.
Great. So from that perspective, then, the red line version was in our packet. Is everyone comfortable with the way that that's kind of drafted right now? I mean, we might come back to it like we just said, but what we have here makes sense to everybody? We can straw vote that unanimously, yes?
Up to 10-minute recess. Is that fine with everyone?
Correct. Yeah, I'm fine with the 10 minutes. Like
That's
two
fine.
groups across
Let's
the
get
hall or
let's
whatever.
get it done and get on to the other question, which I think is, yeah.
Okay, Councilor Baker's got plans. All right.
Soup's
Which
getting
is great.
cold, John.
Yeah, well, we could. Yeah, let's not. So the next item has to do with the question of our calendar, the committee schedules. And I believe that, we have talked about this once before. I believe that we ended on a question that the clerk's office is here to talk to us about, because there is an opportunity for us to make some adjustments. And I don't know, Carol, would you be the one to walk us through what you found or what you're thinking here?
Sure, thank you.
Thank you.
I will be brief for Councilor Baker's sake. I think the memo kind of really states it. There were some questions about whether we could spread out, especially the 3 Ps Wednesday. And I understand that. So I went back, I talked to committee clerks and my deputy clerk to kind of go over the history and possible changes we could do. And we really came across with joint referrals. It's really important that finance is the last committee to hear those joint referrals, and public facilities quite often has a public works large project, and joint referrals happen when the budget appropriation is over $50,000. And during that time, typically it goes to the corresponding committee where the project is kind of, that's where it's being discussed. And sometimes that project changes during that discussion, which may affect the amounts. So logically, if we did want to move any committee, it could be the finance committee. And it is something, when talking to prior finance committee clerks, they felt comfortable that that report could be turned around quickly too. Done on Thursday all day. We would have to, of course, talk to the chair and make sure they're ready to approve it Friday morning so that we can get it into the Friday packet. But that does open up Monday, which has that. So there is that possibility open for discussion about the possibility of moving one of the 3 Ps to that other Monday. And that's the very brief overview.
Yeah, there's a lot to that. That kind of that would be significant. Councilor Baker, thoughts?
So I've expressed my view before, but unless the finance committee felt strongly about it, I would preserve the current arrangement, because the advantage that has is that it preserves the second Wednesday, which we often need sometimes for special meetings or other things. We're trying to avoid Thursdays, and I've just found that the value of having the meetings and everything front loaded in terms of the committee clerks can get them done. You know, the two items are really, finance is acting last in this way as well. So my view is to leave it alone, but that's where I am.
Okay, I think that if I didn't say this out loud the last time we spoke, I'd be surprised, but when I first joined the council and really kind of got used to the rhythm of how things went through, not only city council, but city departments, I initially had a challenge with it, trying to understand. My concern was actually on the off Monday nights. It was ZAP and finance, because I was really curious about both. And then you kind of figure it out, how to kind of bounce between the two meetings. Zoom is incredibly helpful in that regard. I'm a fan of leaving things kind of the way they are as well, but Councilor Krinsman, thoughts?
My initial reaction is to give it a go. I mean, the concern that led to this is the fact that every month, twice a month, we have 3 committees that are scheduled simultaneously and 2 other committees that are scheduled simultaneously. And members of the public, counselors, it restricts counselors' abilities to join those committees or be members of those committees, right? You can only be on one of the Ps. You can't actually. Let me back up. My overall concern here is that the council is structured in a way that does not allow the city to benefit from the expertise of the councilors, of the elected officials. Okay, and by that, for starters, every committee has 1 member from each ward, regardless of their interest, their expertise, their desires. Okay, so if the city happens to have 2 brilliant finance, accounting, whatever experts, but they both live in Ward 5, well, that means that only one of them can serve on the finance committee. They can go, because all counselors, we brilliantly say that all counselors can go to all meetings and can participate in all meetings, but they can't serve on the committee and they can't vote on the committee. So that's one way that I think we limit the reach of our 24 elected counselors. The second way we limit it is by scheduling meetings simultaneously with each other, which literally prevents counselors from being in 2 places at once. Of course, Zoom makes it a little bit easier, or counselors can set priorities and try and schedule around that. But again, just from a structural perspective, it works against the city's ability to benefit from the resources it has. And then lastly, members of the public also can only participate in 1 committee at a time. They can watch them afterwards, or they can, find out what happened, but they can't be in 2 places at once. So my concern initially was that given all those factors, is there a way for us to, restructure the committee meeting schedule so that there are fewer conflicts? Councilor Baker has pointed out a number of times, all the reasons why it came to be. I credit the fact that it came to be for good and honest and well-intentioned reasons, and there is a method to the madness. However, if there are ways to, again, tinker with it a little bit so that we have fewer conflicts, I'm interested in that. I like the clerk's idea. It makes sense to me that finance goes last for the joint referrals. So I credit that as a principle under which we ought to operate, and our recommendation ought to be true to that. But if there's a way to move that meeting and then take one of the 3 Ps so that we only have 2 meetings conflicting on twice on Wednesdays, we'll still have 2 meetings conflicting on the every other Monday, but at least we will have reduced the number of conflicts that we have. So I am interested in the proposal as a first step on seeing if there's a slightly better way to do things. Thanks.
Okay. Clerk Moore.
I just wanted to interject that I have not talked to the current chair of the Finance Committee about this change, knowing that this is for next year, but I haven't had any input. This is just a preliminary kind of throw this out there. Thank you.
Right. And I mean, not for nothing, but the current chair might not be the chair next term, but correct. I get your point, right? Councilor Baker?
So I just want to remind people that one other dimension of this that was an intentional part of it was that um, if you look at committees of relative different activities, you basically served on finance, zoning, and planning, or land use, and then on the three Ps, and it sort of spread the opportunity around. This would open up the possibility of somebody serving on both finance and zoning and planning, but not on the other committees. And just having been the president at one point trying to staff the committees, I will tell you that it is the most difficult job of the role. Doesn't mean it's not impossible to do it under an alternative arrangement, but it certainly made for, I think, a more balanced board in the sense of distribution of power and authority. So I would maintain the current arrangement because the schedule also facilitates that. But again, that's just my preference.
Councilor Humphrey?
I think along the same lines, I definitely am having some concern with the idea. I mean, essentially, we have, 6 major committees that are in 2 groups, and this proposal is essentially that we're going to switch which group is finance is in and which group public facilities is in, right? That is sort of the point that Councilor Baker, I think, was just making. Somebody that's on public facilities is now not going to be on zoning and planning, right? Like, isn't that a de facto result of this? I don't know.
I think it would depend which of the three Ps got moved to occur simultaneously with zoning and planning, wouldn't it?
Well, okay, but so one of them anyway. And then we're also potentially discussing later in the agenda some pretty significant changes to the distribution of stuff, right? And which I don't know if some of them are going to happen because there's obviously some drawbacks to those as well. But I don't know. It's just one of the P committees is now going to be like definitively taken out of like you just can't be doing zoning and planning or finance or whatever. I don't know. I can see some potential messes here as a result of just moving it around.
Understood.
Unless it's not conflicting, right? Unless you're saying we're not going to have zoning and planning conflict with anything, but I don't think that's an option here.
Yeah, I mean, there somewhere in here, I'm sure there's a well-traveled math challenge, right? You've got your number of committees, number of days, assuming we try and avoid Thursdays, we still want to allow land use to meet on a weekly basis when they get busy, so they kind of have 2 meeting slots, so to speak, and they take up two of the 6 days every 2 week cycle. Somewhere in there, there's, I don't think the numbers or the math works out, at least, not that I've looked at it for hours at a time, but that would be a challenge too, I think, because the way I'm reading this, I think Bill might be right, Councilor Humphrey might be right. We're kind of lining up now a P to conflict with a biggie, which would be ZAP, I think.
Yeah.
Sorry, right? I mean, maybe.
Yeah, no, that's what I was, yeah.
So, but anyway, Councilor Krinsman?
Yes and no. I think,
Yes,
again, the clerk can correct me if I'm wrong. I think the proposal is to move finance to a Wednesday on which currently nothing is regularly meeting, the second and fourth Wednesday of the month.
Correct.
So it would be, right, okay, go ahead.
Okay, so currently there are 3 days, right, that occur every 2 weeks on which there are meetings. This would add a 4th day. So finance would be on its own on the second and fourth Wednesday of the month. That would create the flexibility to move one of the 3 Ps to another day, either the day that finance previously held with zoning and planning. It could be on a Tuesday with land use, or it could be a different day. But I like the idea, and I would be fine with Tuesday if people prefer to have land use conflict with one of the 3 Ps rather than zoning and planning. but I think it gives a little bit more flexibility built into the schedule by adding essentially a fourth day that the 6 committees can meet on. Do I have that right?
Right, but again, I think the concern here is that you are now definitely saying that one of the 3 Ps is mutually exclusive with either zoning and planning or land use, depending on whether you do Monday or Tuesday. And in either case, I think a lot of people are going to have an issue with that.
Oh, okay. I don't. People do. They do. Okay.
Well, the alternative might be if I'm kind of knocking this around the right way, right? Week 1, right, or weeks 1 and 3 could be city council Monday, Tuesday land use, 2 Ps on the Wednesday, Thursday empty. The alternating weeks, I think weeks 2 and 4, zap on Monday theoretically, land use potentially again. I don't think they use every Tuesday throughout the year, right?
I think they.
But
I think they do 1, 2, 3. First
I
3
can,
Tuesdays.
Sorry, good point. But I don't think they meet every weeks 1, 2, and 3 on Tuesdays. I think they do often, but I don't think it's every single 1, 2, and 3. But thank you. And then you could then avoid at least the assignments by counselor by saying, okay, so on that, the second and fourth Tuesday, it would be land use and finance, followed by, or no, you wouldn't want to do that because you want finance last.
Yeah.
So that means finance has to be there.
I think,
Never mind.
I think the problem is you keep coming back to where you began, is the least worst, not necessarily optimal. And I just want to say that again, part of the rationale for having land use on Tuesdays, because items occur in different wards, people wanted to come be available to attend those meetings and not have a conflict. So we really tried to make sure that of all the committees that was unopposed, so to speak, it would be land use. And the rest of them would be a division of labor. And we understand that. So if I don't think there's a full proposal before us, is there, or is there a proposal, or where are we?
There was a specific proposal to move it to one of the 3 Ps to the Monday instead of finance, and to move the finance to an alternate Wednesday.
Okay, so if we, I'm not going to support that, but let's see what the subcommittee feels.
So Councilor Baker,
and I'm trying to think of it as well, not only for the purposes of attending meetings, but just the purposes of the council president assigning people to committees, right? I think, like, I don't know. It just, I think there's going to be some real issues if like, it's one thing to have the 3 Ps be mutually exclusive with each other, but it's another thing to then start having them be mutually exclusive with either zoning or land use. And, maybe there was a past era where that would have actually worked, but we are now more than 10 years into the era of all elections in the city being about zoning and land use issues. So, people might have some strong feelings about it.
You think?
I like being on the finance committee because then I don't have to be on those committees.
Well, it has been a refuge for some people who don't want to zone or plan.
Sure. Right.
On a regular basis.
Or use land. So I think the way this is, like, I'm kind of just scribbling out the different options here. I think the clerk's office has offered an option that also has a drawback. I'm inclined to leave things the way they are for the exact reason that Councilor Baker just pointed out. As once per term, the council president has the responsibility or the burden of assigning people to these committees, and we are setting up 1 P to then be, schedule wise anyway, in conflict with another one of the biggies, as I call them, right? The biggies and the Ps. it just seems to me that we do bump into that same scheduling challenge, assuming we don't want to use Thursdays, right? Which makes sense. And if I'm prioritizing how I think about what we have to get done, we might have the best solution in front of us right now in terms of what it is I shouldn't say what's in front of us, what we're actually doing. I'd be inclined to leave it alone for now, and at least until we could reorganize and come to a consensus that, hey, we're going to have to, if we want to solve that conundrum, we have to utilize a Thursday. Because I think, and then we have another problem with the clerk's office, right? Because then they have to turn around to report. Well, I suppose it's not if it's the first Thursday, right? Only if it's the second in the cycle. Is that true?
We could make it true. Also, I know that the public may not enjoy that, because then they're all kind of dumped just the weekend before the council meeting. But also we have to remember traffic council is one Thursday out of the month. I think it's the third one. Jacqueline, I think it's the third one, right?
They vary every month, but they try generally to stay around the third unless something happens.
Unless there's something happens. Okay, so we do have that little one.
And
I do know that
Thursdays
there's a
have
council.
traditionally been a good day for special events to be held for counselors, knowing that there are no committee meetings, which is kind of a decent thing. So listen, if the three of you want to, collectively be wrong about this, that's totally fine. I can accept being outvoted, and we can move on.
Duly noted. And again, like, even if we we basically say for now, like, we're going to leave it alone. If someone has an epiphany 3 months from now, we still have the opportunity to come back and say, hey, what about this? And then we put it to the, at least Programs and Services Committee. But I think for now, what I'm hearing is leave it alone.
Yes, just want to once again thank Carol Moore. Appreciate you doing the homework on this. Appreciate you looking into it and coming up with what I think was a very reasonable tweak. Again, really appreciate the work you put into this. So thank you.
No problem.
Thank you, Carol. We can all agree on that.
Bingo. Bingo. All right. Sorry. All right. The last item, and I did, I wrote up from my notes, Jacqueline and I compared notes, Mr. and I compared notes, to arrive at what we have talked about so far with kind of rebalancing the workload, with an eye towards, bulking up the work that is assigned to PS&T. There were 4 items, and I'll read through them really quickly. We've already talked about taking all the auto dealership licensing items and bringing those into PS&T. Currently, they're the only ones, I believe, that are still with land use. This would consolidate all of them at PS&T, for better or for worse, but there you go. We also talked about the possibility of, I don't think we arrived at yeah, we like this idea or not, but establishing PS&T as the committee that would hear all future climate and sustainability items. I suspect that regardless of the fact that I might not know what those are today, I suspect they're coming. We did talk about shifting shifting health and human services topics from PS, Programs and Services, to PS&T. We've had a couple of those more recently that were in my mind: nicotine-free generation, rodent infestations, and things of that nature, like the hoarding concerns that we heard about a month ago, or at least this calendar year. And then if we were to start to kind of move those items into PS&T, it would make sense, I think, to kind of expand the definition of the or title, if you will, of the committee to something closer to public health and safety. In other words, it'd be a lot broader. I don't know how that list strikes people tonight when you hear it that way. But those are the things that we recall we've spoken about. Councilor Humphrey, you got your hand up first.
Thank you. A couple points. One, we might want to not make a decision on either suggestion until we've decided on both of them, just for balancing purposes, because I have a feeling that the climate and sustainability type stuff could end up, as you say, growing to be a quite significant portfolio in the coming years. The second point, have to flag this. It has come up in discussions behind the scenes before. Anything that touches on zoning code issues as it relates to sustainability and so forth, I believe has to go through the zoning and planning process. I think that might even be state law. So there is a limit to how much can be pulled out of the climate side and put into a different committee. That was one of the I don't know that I necessarily agreed with it, but let's say that the prior chair of zoning and planning felt strongly about not diverting it to a new or separate committee or whatever. Um, and I think there's at least it has to be taken into consideration when we're trying to figure this out. Now, granted, there are going to be some types of items that are for sure not zoning and planning. Maybe there's even some that aren't public facilities, although again, I think some of them are going to fall under public facilities because they have to do with things like stormwater infrastructure and that sort of thing. But the question then is, yeah, do you put those under PS&T, or do you leave them where they basically tend to fall by default, which is programs and services? You know, so I wanted to bring that up because I'm not sure that it is possible to consolidate everything on that topic into a different committee. Abstractly, I think that is a good idea. I just am not sure that we're actually able to do it.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Appreciate that. Councilor Krinsman?
You. I think I'm looking at the notes, the 4 points which you sort of went through in the recommendations. I think number one is a no-brainer in terms of auto dealer relationships to PS&T. I think it is a good idea to establish PS&T as the home for climate and sustainability items. So I actually like 1 and 2. My hesitancy around number 3 is a hesitancy, but really just maybe a consideration that we look at parameters around possible joint referrals. The way some things are joint referrals with, something in finance, maybe if it's a program, right, or a service provided by the city, but it deals with climate impact or sustainability or something like that, maybe it's a joint referral between PS&T and programs and services. That would be more comfortable to me.
Okay. And is that from the city would then have to implement a program, therefore the title of programs and services kind of comes into play, but it makes sense, right?
Yeah, I mean, the way we took up nicotine-free generation, I think programs and services did a really good job with that. But I don't think it would be unreasonable to say we want to get the public health and safety committee's input on this particular, ordinance change or something from that perspective. So.
Okay. All right. Councilor Baker.
So I agree with Councilor Krinsman on the first item. The climate thing, we've talked about in our planning process that now we've had to defer it because of the change in personnel, but to the extent that there's a building issue, we've really tried to hold on to building questions in zoning and planning because we have jurisdiction over ISD as well as planning. But to the extent that there are non-building related items, I'm okay with the idea of having sort of a presumption that goes to public safety, an item that and things like the health related items the ones listed there seem to me are perfectly appropriate for a transfer. the item that came to public safety recently, and I think it actually worked well, and I'm not exactly sure what you would change in the language, was the conversation about the Newton Center parking lot. You know, that worked, and so there may be some adjustment in the scope to pick up things like that, which really related to parking as much as anything. It did have some open space aspects, but it was really parking. So I'm generally positively disposed to what you talked about. Is just a question of how you sort of manage it around the edges.
Agreed. And I think one other thought that a few city councilors have also mentioned is at some point, does the city council create an RPR-like committee that would handle climate and sustainability topics? RPR-like from the perspective of they meet when they need to meet. They meet, at least interim, because I do suspect that the volume of work there is going to steadily increase perhaps over time, and maybe it doesn't come to fruition. But if we had an RPR-like committee that was assigned, right, it would be an additional assignment on top of, the two committees. Maybe that's something we might need to consider as well. Especially if we don't like kind of bringing it into PS&T.
Well, the only concern I have is if you don't have the ability to get it done, that's an argument for another committee. But the trend line historically for us is to try and reduce the number of committees and make the each of them carry a fairly balanced load. So, I mean, if we get to a point where a committee can't carry the load, then that's an argument for creating another committee. We have done that on occasion, but I would do it on a sparing basis and have the way to do it, I think, as a trial would be the president has the ability to appoint across committees a special committee and
Right.
let that take up a matter, and then it fades. But so I'm not sure I need to go as far as a special additional committee, but I think the idea generally to move some things around is good. And I'm sorry, Councilor Humphrey, I realize your hand is up and I spoke out of turn. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Just adding on to that, I think abstractly, the proposal you just mentioned, right, something along the lines of real property reuse, is what former Councilor Bowman and I had been led to believe was about to happen at the beginning of the prior term. And then my understanding, besides the objections of one of the standing committee chairs, is that this is what I heard, was that the mayor flatly said no, that she did not want another committee dealing with, as it related to staff time. I don't know what the demands would have been in terms of clerking, but certainly that she didn't want to have staff going to more meetings than they already were, that kind of thing. And I don't know, I'm not saying she has the official final veto here, but obviously if she was going to be, or some future mayor, I should say, was going to be uncooperative on that point, then it makes more sense to just reorganize the responsibilities of the existing committees and so forth.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah.
I don't think it would be an increase in workload necessarily, but it would certainly likely, I guess, extend onto additional nights. And I think
Right.
that's
Well,
legitimate.
that's
Yeah.
the thing, right? Because if
Yeah.
they're currently mostly just going to like zoning and planning and programs and services, for example, or occasionally public facilities, and then now they're having to go to, another, right? Like, I guess you can make that argument. Uh, Is it, so I don't know if I'm prepared to make a decision on this particular point tonight because it does feel like something I want to digest a little bit more. Is it possible for us to get an inventory of what are all of the climate, environmental, sustainability, resilience topics that exist that come before the city council or are likely to, and what committees they currently go to, and which ones of those can actually be moved? right? Because if there's some that like have to be public facilities or they have to be zoning and planning, I'd like to know that. And then I'd like to know what's left. And I would guess a lot of those currently go to programs and services. And that may also make sense depending on what they are, right? Because if we're keeping parks and recreation type stuff in programs and services, and it happens to be that that's a kind of climate issue, right? Something like that, then maybe it makes sense to just say that programs and services is the focal point for that. On the other hand, if we are able to move more stuff than I thought we were, then that's an argument absolutely for saying let's just consolidate it into, what was PS&T, and move a bunch of stuff out of programs and services as well. And, I personally think this is going to be a huge thing and, that we are going to want to be moving fast on it, and have the ability to be responsive. I think former Councilor Bowman had quite a lot of ideas locked and loaded in terms of what to do if we were to have this type of a setup, but that didn't happen. So, I don't know. And in fact, I might go and ask her and see, what she thinks about it as well, because she might have a practical suggestion here on how to make this work. But, so is that something we can get like an inventory of here are the climate related issue or anything environmental, I think, right? Like just make it as broad as possible so we can get a sense of like where is it
Right.
currently falling.
And just out of curiosity, if I may, I'm going to call on Councilor Maliki or perhaps Councilor Wright when because one of the items that, I don't know if this makes sense at all, but what about the tree ordinance? Would that have made sense to not run through programs and services? Would it have been faster, more efficient? I don't know. If it were it had more air to, room to breathe, so to speak. I don't know how else to say it.
Well, it heavily involved Mark Welch. So
Right. Parks and Rec, his work normally,
Right,
Parks and
right.
Rec work goes to PS.
yeah.
All right, so I'll take that as a no, not really.
Yeah, I don't think so. I'm trying to think,
Okay.
what else?
I'm trying to think of anything like other than and Councilor Baker mentioned, like recently Birdo, but that didn't touch zoning really. I mean,
What about
it
those,
was
like,
there.
leaf
sorry?
blower ordinance? Leaf blower ordinance?
Ordinance?
Right. That's another, air pollution, sound pollution, those type of things. Right. And that's the problem is you can make an argument for any of these things to be in or not in a particular committee.
Yeah,
You could, but I think that one of the things that,
because leaf blower relates to ISD.
It also relates to the police.
Yeah.
it also relates to Parks and Rec to a degree. It also relates to programs and services the cities provide. So yeah, I think that we could make the argument to shift it around. And I suppose theoretically, we could do the same with stormwater ordinances, although PF makes a lot of sense there. Zoning it eventually has to touch zoning as well. But
that's why I kind of want to see like, is there a long enough list to move, yeah.
So
I think that's a legit question, but Councilor Baker?
So I'm just going to again say, let's move what we know we can move and get it done. And then maybe split this item into two. We can fix piece of it now, and send it up and get it done. And that will simplify at least the part of the referral of the auto dealer licenses and so forth. And then hold the balance to try and see if there are environmental matters that appropriately would go, or public health matters to an expanded jurisdiction. I don't think we have to solve everything tonight. Councilor Humphreys raised some interesting questions. And I think the point of holding on to certain things in programs and services, I think that the tree ordinance is well rooted there, thanks to Councilor Chrisman. I hate to
see what you did there.
Sorry about that. I can't. There is a value in continuity, and even leaf blowers and things like that, where you've got people who've served and know the area. But something that's novel, there is some value in, like the environmental things that we're beginning to see. Go somewhere else.
Sorry. So how do we? So then I'm just looking at the clock. We've got 3.5 minutes. If we're going to give Councilor Krinsman a minute to prepare for our 7 o'clock But I'm just wondering then, in the interest of kind of carving out what we're comfortable with, I definitely think what I'm hearing is item 2 is really kind of the sticking point. An inventory, I think, is a really good idea for number 2. Do we feel like numbers 1 and 3 on the list are good to go to PS&T? What do we think there?
So I was going to suggest that 1, we do, and
Yep.
for number 2, we just consider sort of a rules change that climate and sustainability items get joint referrals as needed. I mean, we talked about a number of different programs tonight that either went to programs and services or somewhere else that could have also been within the jurisdiction of a new, committee. So why don't we sort of ease the transition with the joint referral?
Okay, I wonder if that would slow things down as opposed to speed them up, but it's a legitimate point. We can pick that up, I guess, when we talk again. Sorry.
I would not do that at the moment, just because I think one of the values of this process is division of labor. So and to add opportunity to one committee with and reduce some of the burden on some others. So I would hold that one out as a second item to be continued, but I think 1 and 3 could be done. And then 4 is a matter of just sorting out what the best name is.
Right. Once we get everything else kind of in line. Councillor Maliki, super quick, we got 2 minutes left. You're on mute.
It always seemed weird that PS&T never got to hear the Washington Street pilot. That's one point. I would not shift health and human services related items yet, because it's unclear how many there would be. And can someone remind me why the recent Jennifer Steele's presentation on the flood zones or whatever, why that was a zoning thing? Because I think of zoning as something that applies differentially. And this is a water thing. It seems more like a
Fair enough.
That-
Councilor Baker,
I can answer that. I think it's just because the Conservation Commission
right, okay, the
is a
committee.
jurisdiction, and it also involves what you can build and when, and that sort of, again, the function on the policy level of the Zoning and Planning Committee.
It's because ZAP has Conservation Commission.
Yeah.
well, planning does.
Planning, yeah, it's part of planning,
Right.
yeah.
Planning and development, anyway. Okay, I think that is as far as we're gonna get tonight. So I do appreciate everyone's time. Thank you. I've got some follow-ups. We'll get get working on an inventory. I'll talk, Councilor Humphrey, I'll give you a quick, we can swap some email on, reaching out to Alicia to get some, the benefit of her knowledge there as well.
Yeah, sounds good.
Are you going to at least move auto licenses? Can you do that
Yes.
now?
We
Yeah,
already
I'm
had
confirming
decided
we're
that
gonna-
previously, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah, we
yeah.
pretty much talked that through, and then naming we'll worry about at the end. In 2 and 3, we're gonna get some more info rolling on.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it. I'm gaveling us done.
All right, thank you.
Jacqueline.
Thank you.